The night was cold and still across northern Ukraine. At exactly 4:32 in the morning on November 1st, 2025, that stillness was violently shattered. Russia unleashed a massive, coordinated attack, codenamed Operation Winter Strike. The targets were the bustling cities of Kharkiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy. These cities are home to millions of people, families who were asleep in their beds, unaware of the terror hurtling towards them from the sky. The air filled with the roar of incoming missiles and the menacing buzz of drones, a symphony of destruction aimed at civilian centers and critical infrastructure. It was a terrifying start to what would become a long, dark day for the nation. The scale of the assault was immense. Russia launched a volley of 42 caliber cruise missiles, each one a powerful and expensive weapon of war. These were accompanied by 18 Lancet suicide drones, smaller but equally deadly, designed to loiter and strike with precision. The total value of this deadly arsenal exceeded $160 million, a staggering sum spent to inflict maximum damage. The skies over northern Ukraine lit up as air defense systems roared to life. Brave Ukrainian operators worked tirelessly to protect their cities, their families, and their homes from the incoming storm of steel and fire. Ukraine's air defense shield, a mix of advanced Patriot systems and reliable S-300 batteries, put up a fierce fight against the onslaught. The defenders managed to intercept an incredible number of threats, shooting down 36 of the 42 cruise missiles. They also neutralized all 18 of the Lancet drones before they could reach their intended targets. This high success rate was a testament to the skill and courage of the air defense crews. However, in a battle of such scale, even a small number of breakthroughs can have devastating consequences. 6 cruise missiles managed to slip through the defensive net, and they were headed for undefended, vulnerable locations. The attack was a clear signal of Russia's intentions as the harsh winter approached. It was aimed not just at military targets, but at the will and spirit of the Ukrainian people. By targeting major population centers so close to NATO's eastern border, less than 80 kilometers away, Russia was sending a message of defiance to the world. The sounds of explosions echoed across the plains, waking millions to a new and brutal chapter of the war. For the residents of Kharkiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy, the dawn brought not light, but the grim reality of fire, smoke, and chaos. The most horrific consequence of the 6 missiles that broke through Ukraine's defenses occurred in the city of Chernihiv. One of the Kaliber missiles slammed directly into the city's main maternity hospital. The building, a place of life and new beginnings, was torn apart in an instant. The explosion ripped through walls and floors, turning wards into rubble and recovery rooms into tombs. The screams of newborn babies were replaced by the thunderous crash of collapsing concrete and shattering glass. It was a scene of unimaginable horror, a place of healing transformed into a site of mass casualties. The human toll was immediate and heartbreaking. The attack claimed the lives of 38 people. Among the dead were 19 newborn infants, tiny lives extinguished before they had even had a chance to begin. 11 dedicated medical staff members, doctors and nurses, who had worked through the night to care for their patients, were also killed in the blast. They died alongside the mothers and babies they were sworn to protect. Another 127 people were wounded, suffering from injuries that ranged from minor cuts to life-altering trauma. First responders who arrived at the scene were met with a scene of utter devastation and profound loss. The aftermath was a grim tableau of what modern warfare inflicts upon the innocent. Rescue workers carefully picked through the twisted metal and broken concrete, searching for survivors. They carried out the small, blanket-wrapped bodies of infants with tears in their eyes. The attack on the hospital was not just an act of war, it was an attack on humanity itself. It struck at the most vulnerable, at the very symbol of hope and future generations. The international community watched in horror as the news spread, a stark reminder of the brutal cost civilians pay in this conflict. The destruction of the Chernihiv maternity hospital sent a shockwave of grief and anger across Ukraine and the world. It was a deliberate targeting of a civilian facility, a clear violation of the laws of war. The loss of so many innocent lives, especially those of newborns, hardened the resolve of the Ukrainian people. This was not just a military strike, it was an act of terror designed to break their spirit. Instead of instilling fear, however, the tragic event fueled a burning desire for justice and a determination to hold the attackers accountable for their crimes against humanity. The Russian missiles that evaded Ukraine's defenses did not only target hospitals. Another key objective of Operation Winter Strike was the nation's energy grid. As winter's grip tightened and temperatures dropped below freezing, Russia aimed to plunge Ukraine into darkness and cold. The attack was brutally effective. Several missiles struck critical power infrastructure, destroying 14 essential substations and 312 transformers across 5 northern provinces. These facilities are the heart of the electrical system, responsible for distributing power to homes, businesses, and essential services. their destruction had an immediate and widespread impact on the civilian population. Suddenly the lights went out for over 400,000 residents. Homes that were just moments before filled with the dim light of early morning were plunged into total darkness. The cold, which had been kept at bay by electric heaters, began to seep in. With the outdoor temperature already at -1 degree Celsius and expected to fall further, the loss of power was not just an inconvenience, it was a life-threatening crisis. Families huddled together under blankets, their breath visible in the frigid air of their own homes. The simple act of making a warm drink or charging a phone became an impossible luxury for hundreds of thousands of people. The damage to the civilian infrastructure was catastrophic, with the total estimated cost reaching approximately $420 million from this single attack. This figure includes the destroyed power grid components, the damaged hospital, and other civilian property. But the true cost could not be measured in dollars. It was measured in the fear of an elderly person unable to use their medical equipment, or the desperation of parents trying to keep their children warm without heat. The attack was a calculated blow against the resilience of the Ukrainian people, an attempt to make daily life unbearable and force a surrender through suffering. While the civilian population suffered, one missile did find a military-industrial target. It struck and completely destroyed an unmarked factory near the city of Sumy. This facility was secretly producing advanced unmanned aerial vehicles for the Ukrainian military. The building, valued at $93 million, was leveled, wiping out 12,000 square meters of vital infrastructure. While this was a significant blow to Ukraine's defense production, successful strike against a military asset in the entire barrage. The overwhelming majority of the damage and all of the casualties were inflicted upon innocent civilians and the infrastructure they depended on. News of the devastating attack, especially the bombing of the Chernihiv maternity hospital, reached Kiev just before sunrise. The reports painted a grim picture of death and destruction. In the secure underground bunkers of the presidential administration, the atmosphere was tense and somber. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky convened an emergency meeting with his top military commanders. The grief in the room was palpable, but it was quickly forged into a steely resolve. They knew that a conventional response would not be enough. Russia had crossed a line, and the world needed to see that such actions would have severe consequences. President Zelensky listened intently as his generals outlined the situation. The attack was not just a random act of aggression, it was a strategic move to terrorize the population and cripple the country ahead of winter. A simple statement of condemnation would be ignored. A proportional strike on a Russian military base near the border would be expected and easily dismissed. The leadership in the room agreed that a different kind of response was needed. They needed to do something bold, something unexpected, something that would strike at the very heart of the aggressor and shatter their sense of security. The decision was made quickly. At 5:20 in the morning, less than an hour after the Russian attack began, President Zelensky authorized a highly classified and incredibly risky mission, Operation Spiralgate. The plan was not to inflict mass casualties or target civilians as Russia had done. Instead, the objective was to execute a precision surgical strike deep inside Russian territory, targeting the symbols of power and wealth in Moscow itself. The mission was designed to demonstrate that Ukraine possessed the capability and the will to hold the Russian elite accountable, proving that no one was safe from the consequences of the war they had started. Planning for such a daring operation had been underway for months, a contingency for a moment just like this. The Ukrainian military had been secretly modifying a pair of old fighter jets, turning them into sophisticated stealth aircraft. The mission would be a high-stakes gamble. It involved penetrating the most heavily defended airspace on the planet, a $9.4 billion defense shield protecting the Russian capital. The risks were enormous, but the potential reward was even greater, to send an undeniable message that Ukraine would not be broken and that the fight could be brought directly to Moscow's doorstep. The core of Operation Spiralgate rested on two unlikely heroes, a pair of heavily modified MiG-29 fighter jets. These were not new top-of-the-line aircraft, they were older Soviet-era planes that Ukrainian engineers had transformed into something extraordinary. Codenamed the Spiral Project, these jets were coated with a special radar-absorbent material. Their engines were fitted with advanced infrared suppressors, designed to cool the exhaust gases and reduce their heat signature. This combination of technologies made them incredibly difficult to detect, reducing their probability of being spotted by enemy radar and heat-seeking missiles by an astonishing 87%. They were, in effect, ghosts in the machine. The two jets with call signs Phantom 1 and Phantom 2 were stationed at a secret, dispersed airbase near the city of Vinnytsia. The pilots selected for the mission were among the best in the Ukrainian Air Force. Seasoned veterans with thousands of hours of flight time. They had trained for this specific mission in simulators for months, memorizing every detail of the flight path and every contingency plan. They knew the risks intimately. Flying into the heart of Russia meant navigating a dense network of advanced air defense systems. The chances of being detected, intercepted, and shot down were incredibly high. On the night of November 2nd, under the cover of complete darkness, the order was given. Phantom 1 and Phantom 2 taxied onto the runway, their engines emitting a low, muffled hum. The total value of these two remarkable aircraft was less than $12 million combined, a fraction of the cost of the missiles Russia had used in its attack. Armed with a carefully selected payload of missiles and decoys, the pilots gave their final checks. Their mission was not one of brute force, but of cunning and precision. They were not just flying planes, they were delivering a message directly to the architects of the war. With a final confirmation from command, the two Phantoms roared down the runway and lifted silently into the night sky. They immediately dropped to an extremely low altitude, using the curvature of the Earth to hide from distant radar stations. Their flight path was a carefully planned corridor, designed to exploit known gaps in Russian surveillance. Every pilot knows that flying into enemy territory is dangerous, but this was different. This was a flight into the Dragon's Den, an audacious journey to the center of Russian power. The tension in the cockpit was immense, as two pilots carried the weight of their nation's response on their shoulders. At 3:59 a.m., Phantom 1 and Phantom 2 crossed into Russian airspace. They were flying at a breathtakingly low altitude of just 36 meters, skimming above the trees and frozen fields. This nap of the earth flying was incredibly dangerous, but essential for avoiding detection. As they approached the outer ring of Moscow's formidable air defenses, the first phase of their plan began. The Russian capital was protected by a dense network of 240 radar stations and sophisticated surface-to-air missile systems, including the highly capable Panzer S-1. A direct approach would have been, honestly, suicidal. Ukraine's plan relied on clever deception, not brute force. Phantom 1, the lead aircraft, initiated the ruse. It deployed a small, inexpensive decoy drone, a $25,000 Leica 100 UAV. This decoy was programmed to mimic the radar signature of a much larger, more threatening aircraft. As predicted, the Russian air defense operators took the bait. Believing they were under attack from a full-size bomber or fighter, the nearby Panzer S-1 batteries locked on and fired a volley of interceptor missiles. The sky lit up as nearly $1.9 million worth of Russian missiles streaked towards the cheap decoy, destroying it in a spectacular but, honestly, meaningless explosion. The trick had worked perfectly. This clever maneuver created a critical opportunity. After firing their volley, the Panzer systems entered a mandatory reloading cycle. This process would take 56 minutes, leaving a significant gap in Moscow's defenses. It was the window the Phantoms needed. As the missile launchers were being rearmed, Phantom 2 seized the moment. It climbed slightly and locked onto its next target, a Krasuka 4 electronic warfare unit. This powerful system was the electronic eyes and ears of Moscow's defenses, capable of jamming radar, GPS signals, and communications over a vast area. It was a high-value and dangerous target. With a swift and precise shot, Phantom 2 launched a KH-31P anti-radiation missile. The missile homed in on the powerful electronic emissions of the Krasuka 4, striking it with pinpoint accuracy. The $12 million electronic warfare center was instantly destroyed in a ball of fire. In a single blow, 20% of Moscow's radar coverage was blinded, creating an even wider corridor for the Ukrainian jets. In just the first few minutes of the operation, Ukraine had used a cheap decoy and a single missile to neutralize millions of dollars of advanced Russian military hardware, clearing a path to their final target. With the path now clear, the two Phantom jets executed the final phase of their mission. They ascended rapidly, climbing to an altitude of 10,000 meters. From this height, they had a clear view of their target, the glittering skyscrapers of Kutuzovsky Prospect in western Moscow. This prestigious avenue is not just a random location, it is home to some of Russia's most powerful and wealthy elites. The luxury apartment towers that line the street are where top government officials, oligarchs, and key figures in the military-industrial complex reside. The target was chosen for its symbolic value, a direct strike against the people enabling the war. At precisely 4:09 a.m., the Phantoms launched their payload. They fired 3 R-77 air-to-air missiles, not at the buildings themselves, but programmed to detonate just above and beside them. This was a crucial detail of the plan. The goal was not to cause mass casualties or level the towers, but to create a terrifying and unmistakable spectacle of vulnerability. The airburst explosion sent powerful shockwaves ripping through the area. A massive fire erupted on the upper floors of a 70-story tower, its flames visible for miles across the sleeping city. The sound of the blast shattered the pre-dawn silence. The psychological impact was immense. The shockwaves blew out over 3,000 windows in the surrounding luxury apartments, sending a shower of glass down onto the empty streets below. The explosions also created a powerful electromagnetic pulse that fried the circuitry of the city's vast surveillance network. In an instant, all 76,000 of Moscow's public security cameras went dark, plunging the city's security apparatus into a state of temporary blindness and confusion. The message was clear and terrifying for the residents of those towers. You are not safe. The war you support can reach you even here, in your fortified homes. Having delivered their message, Phantom 1 and Phantom 2 turned sharply and dove back towards the safety of low altitude. They raced back towards Ukrainian airspace, leaving behind a scene of chaos, confusion, and fear in the Russian capital. They had not killed civilians or flattened neighborhoods. Instead, they had shattered the illusion of security that the Russian elite enjoyed. They proved that Ukraine could bypass Russia's most advanced defenses and strike with precision at the very heart of its power structure. The fires on Kutuzovsky Prospect were a warning, a symbol that the consequences of war are not confined to the battlefield. The immediate aftermath of Operation Spiralgate revealed a stunning contrast in military strategy and economic efficiency. In its attack on Ukraine, Russia had expended over $160 million in missiles and drones to kill 38 civilians, cause widespread power outages, and destroy one military factory. The cost in human life and suffering was immense, but in purely financial terms, it was an incredibly expensive and inefficient way to wage war. Russia relied on overwhelming firepower and brute force, launching a massive barrage with the hope that some weapons would get through, with little regard for the cost or the collateral damage. In stark contrast, Ukraine's operation was a model of precision and cost-effectiveness. In the opening 7 minutes of their daring raid, the two Ukrainian jets inflicted over $58 million in direct losses on Russian military assets. This included the destruction of the $12 million Krasuka-4 electronic warfare system and the neutralization of $1.9 million worth of interceptor missiles. All of this was achieved for a tiny fraction of the cost. The Ukrainian expenditure for this phase of the mission, covering the decoy drone and the anti-radiation missile, was less than $200,000. It was a masterful display of asymmetric warfare. This vast difference highlights the opposing philosophies of the two militaries. Russia's approach was to spend lavishly on a massive volume of weapons, using its vast resources to try and overwhelm its opponent. Their $9.4 billion air defense shield around Moscow, with its hundreds of radar stations and missile batteries, was designed to be an impenetrable fortress. It represented a belief that security could be bought with immense sums of money and layers of complex technology. The system was built to stop a massive conventional attack, but it was not prepared for a clever surgical strike that exploited its weaknesses. Ukraine, with far fewer resources, was forced to be smarter, more innovative, and more efficient. They could not afford to waste money or equipment. Operation Spiralgate was the perfect example of this philosophy in action. Instead of trying to fight the Russian defense shield head-on, they found a way to trick it, blind it, and bypass it. They used ingenuity and tactical brilliance to achieve what billions of dollars of Russian hardware could not prevent. The mission proved that in modern warfare, cleverness, precision, and courage can be far more powerful than sheer wealth and brute force. As the sun rose over Moscow on November 2, 2025, it illuminated a city in shock. The fires on Kutuzovsky Prospect were a burning symbol that the war had entered a new and unpredictable phase. Operation Spiralgate was more than just a retaliatory strike. It was a fundamental shift in the conflict. For the first time, Ukraine had demonstrated a credible, long-range precision strike capability that could hold strategic targets within Russia at risk. The psychological barrier had been broken. The Kremlin could no longer assure its own elites that the war would be fought exclusively on foreign soil. A deep sense of uncertainty began to settle over the Russian leadership. The question on everyone's mind was, what comes next? Ukraine's bold counterattack had created a new and dangerous dilemma for Moscow. A massive escalation against Ukrainian cities would likely trigger an even stronger response from Ukraine, which had now shown its ability to hit sensitive targets. On the other hand, failing to respond decisively would be seen as a sign of weakness, further eroding the Kremlin's authority. The attack had rewritten the unwritten rules of the conflict. leaving both sides to navigate a treacherous and uncertain path forward. The war was no longer predictable. For Ukraine, the mission was a tremendous morale boost. It was a powerful statement of resilience and defiance in the face of brutal aggression. It showed the Ukrainian people and their international partners that their military was not just defending, but could also innovate and take the fight to the enemy. However, the success also brought new dangers. It risked provoking a far more brutal and indiscriminate Russian response. The leadership in Kyiv knew that while they had won a significant psychological victory, they had also raised the stakes of the entire conflict to a new and perilous level. As of today, November 19, 2025, the world holds its breath. The audacious night raid on Moscow has left a deep scar on the Russian psyche and has fundamentally altered the strategic landscape. Has a new, more dangerous kind of war begun, one fought not just on the front lines but in the skies above capital cities? Or will this shocking event force both sides to reconsider the costs of conflict and seek a path toward peace? The future remains unwritten, hanging in a delicate balance between escalation and negotiation. The only certainty is that the events of early November 2025 will be remembered as a turning point, the moment when the war came home to Moscow.